A sunny day illuminated Peppa Pig's house, but something was wrong. Peppa was playing in her room with her favorite toys when she heard strange laughter outside the window. "What is that sound?" Peppa thought, looking out the window. George sat downstairs building a tower with blocks. His movements were slow and unnatural, as if he were in a trance. "George, are you okay?" Peppa asked, but her brother didn't answer. Mummy Pig was cooking in the kitchen, but her smile seemed too wide. She was stirring something in a pot, and strange green smoke was coming from it. "Dinner is almost ready, dears," Mummy shouted, but her voice echoed strangely. Daddy Pig was reading a newspaper in the living room, but the pages were blank. He kept turning them over and over, not noticing this. "Daddy, why are you reading an empty newspaper?" Peppa asked. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the door. The sound was sharp and frightening, unlike the usual knock of guests. "Who could that be?" Peppa whispered, feeling her heart begin to beat faster. The door slowly opened by itself, creaking on its hinges. A shadow appeared in the doorway, a tall, thin figure with a mad smile. "Hello, little piggies!" The Joker's eerie voice rang out, his laughter echoing through the house. The Joker entered the house, his purple suit contrasting with the bright colors of Peppa's world. His face was pale, and his smile unnaturally wide. "I've come to play a special game with you," the Joker said, pulling strange cards from his pocket. The pig family gathered in the living room, but their eyes were empty. They looked at the Joker as if they were under his control. "The rules are simple. Whoever loses disappears forever." The Joker cackled, laying out cards on the table. Peppa tried to run away, but the doors and windows suddenly disappeared. The house became a closed space with no exit. "No one can leave until the game is over," the Joker hissed, his eyes glowing with an ominous light. One by one, the cards were turned over, and with each card, someone from the family became more transparent, as if dissolving into thin air. "Peppa, help!" George whispered, his voice getting quieter and his figure more ghostly. When the last card was turned over, the Joker disappeared, leaving behind only the echo of mad laughter. The house was empty. The next morning, neighbors found the pig house empty. No one was inside, only children's toys scattered on the floor and strange cards on the table. "Where is the pig family?" the neighbors wondered, but there was no answer. Since then, sometimes at night you can hear children's laughter coming from the empty house and Peppa's quiet voice. "Do you want to play with us?" The house still stands empty, and local residents avoid it. They say that whoever enters inside might hear an invitation to play, but no one knows what happens to those who accept this invitation. A sunny day illuminated Peppa Pig's house, where the family was peacefully having breakfast in the kitchen. Peppa and George sat at the table while Mummy Pig poured juice into glasses. Suddenly, strange laughter echoed from outside the window, long and frightening. Daddy Pig looked out the window but saw no one, only trees swaying in the wind. Peppa and George were playing in the living room when they heard a quiet knock at the door. The sound repeated slowly and rhythmically, as if someone was deliberately trying to scare them. Mummy Pig opened the door and saw a tall figure in a purple suit. The stranger's face was white as chalk, with a red smile reaching his ears and green hair. The strange guest introduced himself as Mr. Smile and asked permission to enter. His voice sounded too cheerful for such a grim appearance, making everyone feel uneasy. The Joker sat in Daddy Pig's chair and began telling funny stories. His tales became increasingly scary, and his laughter grew louder and more frightening. Peppa noticed that toys in the room began disappearing one by one. First, George's Mr. Dinosaur vanished, then Peppa's teddy bear. George cried when he realized his favorite toy was gone. The Joker only laughed even louder, his eyes gleaming strangely in the room's dim light. Mummy Pig tried to call Grandpa Pig, but the phone didn't work. All communication lines were mysteriously cut off, leaving the family isolated. Daddy Pig noticed that all mirrors in the house began showing not their reflections, but empty rooms. The Joker continued sitting and smiling as if nothing was happening. The lights in the house began flickering, and shadows on the walls moved by themselves. The Joker stood up and began slowly walking around the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Peppa and George hid behind the sofa when they saw the Joker's face begin to change. His smile became even wider, and his eyes turned into black holes. Suddenly, everything went quiet, and the Joker disappeared, leaving only a purple card on the table. The card had a smiling mask drawn on it with "See you soon" written below. The family discovered that all their photographs had changed. They now showed only emptiness. The Joker had erased them from all memories, leaving only a strange feeling of anxiety. Peppa woke up in her bed thinking it was all a dream, but when she looked in the mirror, she saw a familiar purple figure behind her shoulder, slowly disappearing with quiet laughter. A sunny day illuminated Peppa Pig's house, but something felt wrong. Peppa played in the garden when the sky suddenly darkened. Strange purple sparks appeared in the air. Peppa watched them with curiosity, not understanding the danger. A huge figure in golden armor emerged from a portal. Thanos slowly surveyed Peppa's peaceful world. George ran out of the house and saw the stranger. He hid behind a bush, trembling with fear. Mummy Pig came out to call the children for lunch. She froze upon seeing the purple giant in the garden. Daddy Pig looked out the window and dropped his newspaper. His face turned pale with horror. Thanos raised his hand with the Infinity Gauntlet. The stones glowed with an ominous light. Grandpa Pig arrived on his boat. He stopped, sensing something wrong in the air. Susie Sheep came to visit, but the house seemed empty. Only strange silence filled the air. Thanos snapped his fingers. Half of the toys in the garden disappeared into dust. Peppa tried to speak to the giant. Her voice trembled with confusion about what was happening. The family gathered together, hugging each other. They looked at Thanos with terror. Thanos smiled a cold smile. He slowly turned toward the family's house. The screen went dark, leaving only the sound of snapping fingers. Silence consumed everything around. The camera showed an empty garden. Only purple dust swirled in the air while children's laughter echoed from nowhere. The mask in the attic. It all started on a rainy evening. The Pig family gathered at home, but something was wrong. Peppa was playing with her dolls in her room. Suddenly, she heard a strange creak from above. George was building a tower with blocks downstairs. The sound repeated, as if someone was walking in the attic. Mummy Pig was cooking dinner in the kitchen. She also heard the footsteps and frowned. Daddy Pig was reading a newspaper in the living room. The creaking became louder and more persistent. Peppa approached her parents with frightened eyes. "Mummy, who is walking up there?" Mummy Pig looked at the ceiling anxiously. "It's probably just the old house creaking." But the sounds didn't stop all night. The family went to bed, but no one could sleep. In the morning, Peppa decided to go up to the attic. She slowly opened the hatch in the ceiling. The attic was dark and dusty. In the corner stood an old chest covered with cobwebs. Peppa carefully approached the chest. Inside lay a white mask with empty eye sockets. The mask was cold and strangely heavy. Peppa took it in her trembling hooves. Suddenly, the mask began to glow with a faint blue light. Peppa got scared and dropped it. The mask fell to the floor and cracked. Strange mist flowed from the crack. The mist enveloped the entire attic in a thick veil. Peppa couldn't see anything anymore. She tried to find the exit, but the hatch had disappeared. The attic walls became endless. Shadows appeared in the mist, silhouettes of unknown figures. They slowly approached Peppa. The shadows began to whisper something incomprehensible. Their voices sounded like echoes from a deep well. Peppa screamed, but her voice disappeared. She ran, but the shadows were everywhere. Downstairs, the family heard strange sounds. George started crying, and the parents ran upstairs. They found the attic empty and cold. Peppa was nowhere to be seen. On the floor lay fragments of the white mask. They were still glowing faintly. Mummy Pig picked up a fragment. It was icy cold and burned her fingers. In the fragment reflected Peppa's face. She was somewhere far away and calling for help. Since then, every night the family hears footsteps. Peppa tries to return home but cannot find her way back from the world of shadows. Peppa Pig and the disappearance of George. The day began like any other. Peppa and George were playing in the garden. They laughed, jumped in puddles, and looked for worms. Peppa turned away for a moment to get the ball, and George was gone. She called out his name. No response. At first, she thought he was hiding. She searched the entire garden. Nothing. The house, empty. Only silence and the soft echo of her hooves. Peppa opened the basement door. They weren't usually allowed down there. The light flickered, the walls were damp, and every sound echoed ominously. But no George. Only an old bike and cobwebs. The school. She rushed to her classroom. Madame Gazelle was reading a book, but her voice sounded distant, flat. Peppa asked about George. Madame Gazelle blinked and said, "You don't have a brother, Peppa." The attic. The creaky ladder moaned beneath her. Boxes, forgotten toys, and a mirror. In the reflection, Peppa stood alone. Even the room behind her was empty in the glass. She went to Granny and Grandpa's house. They greeted her warmly, but when she asked about George, Grandpa frowned. "Who's that?" he asked. Granny just shook her head. Back home, Mummy Pig was baking a pie, Daddy Pig reading his paper. Peppa shouted, "Where's George?" They only exchanged glances and smiled. "You must be tired, dear," said Mummy. "You've always had such imagination," added Daddy. Peppa ran to the treehouse. Empty. Leaves rustled. The air was colder. Then she heard it. "Peppa, this way." Voices from the woods behind the house, whispering like wind through the trees. The forest grew darker. Branches creaked. "Peppa, straight ahead. Now left." The voices guided her. They didn't comfort, but they didn't scare her either. First, she met a spider. Massive, but not hostile. It stared with 6 black eyes. "He is below," it said, "where it's cold, where there are stones." Then a ghost, transparent with a kind face. It pointed with a hoof. "Go past the mist. You'll hear him there." Beyond the mist stood a tall rock. Inside, a dark cave. The cold seeped into her skin. Then she heard George's voice. "Peppa, I'm here." She stepped inside. The walls pulsed faintly. In the center, a stone where George was tied. He was crying. His eyes were dim, his clothes covered in dust. Peppa untied the ropes. The cave trembled. Rocks cracked along the walls. They ran through the forest. The voices whispered behind them. "Don't forget." They made it back home. Everything seemed normal again. The next morning, Peppa awoke next to George. He slept peacefully, holding a small stone from the cave. Since then, she never asked where he had been. Peppa Pig and the zombies in the yard. One morning, Peppa woke up to a strange noise outside. George was still asleep. She got out of bed and looked out the window. Grandpa Pig stood motionless in the garden. His skin was greenish, his eyes cloudy, and his clothes torn. Peppa went downstairs and called for Mummy, but Mummy Pig had changed too. She walked slowly, her head tilted, and dark drool dripped from her mouth. Daddy sat on the couch, his eyes empty, and one leg dragged behind him. Peppa ran to Susie's house, but Susie was strange too. She wandered the yard, her dress ripped, arms stretched forward. No one spoke. No one smiled. The whole town seemed frozen. All of Peppa's friends wandered in circles, as if searching for something. Rebecca Rabbit scratched at a door. Danny Dog clawed the dirt, and Miss Gazelle stood in front of the school without blinking. Peppa hid in the treehouse. She trembled, not knowing what to do. Growls and rustling surrounded her. The zombies didn't notice her as long as she stayed quiet. Night fell. The full moon lit the yard. The zombies gathered around the tree. George came too. He lifted his head, his skin had turned gray, his eyes cloudy, and his toy dinosaur dragged behind him. Peppa screamed. The zombies turned, but no one approached. They just stared. Then, one by one, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the mist. In the morning, everything was quiet. Peppa stepped out of the treehouse. No one was there. The yard was empty. Only George's toy dinosaur lay on the grass. Since then, Peppa never calls anyone by name, and she never looks into the eyes of someone who stays silent too long. Peppa Pig and the werewolf curse. It all started one strange night. The moon was especially large and bright. Peppa woke up to howling outside her window. She looked out and saw Daddy Pig standing on the lawn. His eyes glowing, mouth slightly open, and steam rising from it. He let out a guttural growl. In the morning, everything looked normal. Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper. Mummy was cooking breakfast. But they had strange scratches on their arms, and their eyes avoided Peppa's. George sat quietly, drawing circles in the air. Each day, things got creepier. Mummy Pig began eating raw meat. George scratched at the doors at night. Daddy Pig no longer spoke, only growled. On the third night, Peppa woke to loud howling beneath her window. She looked out. Her family stood in the yard. Their bodies were covered in coarse fur, their eyes animalistic, their hands clawed. Peppa stifled a scream. In the morning, they acted as if nothing had happened. But Peppa knew this wasn't her family. Or not anymore. She went to Grandma and Grandpa's, but they were oddly silent too. In the shed, Peppa found Grandpa's torn jacket and claw marks on the door. The curse had spread. Peppa knew she had to act. In an old book hidden in the attic, she found mention of a witch who lived beyond forests and seas, able to lift ancient curses. The next morning, while the family still slept, she packed her bag and left. First came the foggy forest. Peppa wandered among trees, hearing whispers. Shadows moved on their own. One voice whispered, "You seek the one who knows. Go to the river." At the river, swamp creatures with glowing green eyes blocked her path. They wouldn't let her pass until she solved the riddle carved into stone. What lives without a body, speaks without a mouth, and moves without legs? An echo, Peppa said, and the path opened. Next, the sea of darkness. Her boat rocked on black water. The sky vanished, everything turned gray. Hands reached from the water, but Peppa looked only forward. A voice in her head said, "You won't return the same." On a distant shore stood an old house. Inside, the witch, her face woven from shadow, her eyes glowing violet. She listened silently to Peppa's story. "There is a cure," she whispered, "but the way back is harder. They will be waiting." Peppa received a small violet vial. It pulsed in her hoof. The way back was filled with traps. The forest darker, the sea deeper, and shadows whispered her name. At home, her family waited. They stood on the lawn, now fully werewolves. Their glowing eyes and claws dug into the ground. But when Peppa raised the vial, they froze. Drop by drop, to Daddy, to Mummy, to George, to Grandma and Grandpa. Their bodies trembled, fur faded, and their eyes became human once more. Peppa said nothing. She just hugged George tightly. He hugged back. A single tear glistened on his cheek. Since then, on every full moon, the whole family goes to bed early. And Peppa always checks if the vial is still in its place.